Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sport. And I thought I'd do a bit of an interesting video because of some quotes that former Springbok captain Currie has said, which has got a lot of people talking. And that is the suggestion that Evan Roos could be a potential Springbok captain, or even the next Springbok captain. And it wasn't something I was looking too into it, but it's caused quite a bit of stir, quite a lot of conversation. A couple people asked me about it, so I thought, well, instead of answering everybody individually, why not just jump on here, do a bit of video, give my thoughts, and sort of go through some of the thinking, look at some already said, and sort of see how maybe this might make sense in looking at a broader sense of who the potential captain options could be and why, for example, Evan Lewis is a good candidate, a bad candidate, or even is a candidate or not a candidate. And I'll be interested to see what everybody else has to say about it as well. So please make sure you add your comments and what your thoughts are down in the video comment section below, and smash like on the video if you are new as well. Let's get into it. Right. So speaking to during a URC roundtable discussion, former Springbok captain Cornet Cricker, who famously made his debut as captain on his debut, so made his captaincy debut and his debut in the same game up against Italy. So he's somebody that knows what it's like to be kind of thrown into the deep end. He captained the box 18 times, by the way. And he has basically said that he believes that Evan Roos could be a potential captain for Rassie Erasmus. Where this came from is he said that looking back at last weekend's game against the Ospreys, he said that Evan Roos for him was a stand-up player in a very dismal performance. He said it's one of the young leaders coming through the system. So they are possibly looking at him in terms of potentially Rassie Erasmus and new captains. He said, I think there's so much young talent coming through in this through the system. It's all about harnessing that talent, but also blooding them at the right time and getting them into test match rugby. He said the one nice thing about the URC is that it's close to test match rugby. It's not for, and the guys get used to the URC and the style of play. I think it sets us up for a good international series when the Irish and All Blacks arrive. Speaking about Evan Lewis in particular, he said from schoolboy days, Evan Lewis, has been a leader. He says loose forwards are usually our captains, especially in South Africa, which he's not wrong. He said, I just thought he had an incredible game, and it was hard to have an incredible game when everyone else is not playing well. I was quite impressed with them. He says there are a lot of leaders around, but for me, he raised it up last weekend. And I think more to the point is that he's not looking and saying, right, he needs to captain the box, against Ireland. But he spoke about that Portugal game, saying that he believes that there's going to be a rotated side, and he says during that time in a slightly easy test match, which you don't really get anymore, I think he would try and blood a young captain. So saying that Rassie Erasmus might look at a new captain for that Portugal game, given the fact that it is a tier 2 nation. Now let's talk about this. Now, first of all, Evan Roos is got a bit of a reputation for having a bad disciplinary record, which I think he has cleaned up recently. I saw somebody bringing out the stats about cards, and I think it's not as simple as that. Just because, for example, this season, a player might have one fewer cards or whatever, that doesn't mean they've completely cleaned up their discipline. You've got to look at penalties conceded and the manner in which, he's unfortunately sometimes let the better, his anger get the better of him, and he's, thrown a ball away, or he's, taken a player beyond the ruck, or got involved with the player and seen a penalty turned over, for example, or been sent back 10 meters. So he doesn't have the best record and sort of and reputation, I think maybe a better word, when it comes to his discipline. Although I do think it's something that he will be working very hard on. In terms of sort of the captaincy thing, I must admit I don't particularly look at that Stormer side and think that he is going to be an immediate captain. And I think that's captains are so much more than just on-field leaders. I think that's a very important thing, especially in the modern game. Captain's not just the guy who can rouse people up with a speech. There's so much more to captaincy, especially in rugby. And that's where we've really seen the value in Sia Khaleesi, and someone who handles the refs well, who is a great face for the team as well. Represents the team very well in the media, with the everyday day-to-day life. Is a sort of a very model sort of citizen type thing. He's the perfect example of a potential role model, which I think is important. When you look at a team and the lead and the culture, for example, it all starts at the top, and that's where you've got to get your captain very much right. It's also about somebody who can relate and who can be that bridge between players and coaches, for example. So that relationship has to be very important. And I don't think that not being necessarily a captain candidate makes you a bad player. There's anything wrong with that. I always find that sometimes we are too quick to try and force captaincy onto players because they're good. For example, somebody's talking about Damian Willemse as a potential captain. Now, I don't see Damian Willemse as a potential captain. I see him as the best player in the world. to come. And I don't think, whilst they can be the same, be both at the same time, for example, I think certain players suit captaincy, and that kind of role sort of brings the better out of them and adds to their game. And I think some players enjoy the freeness and to be able to just go out and play your game and focus on your game, focus on what your contributions are. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. And I think that can be such an important part when it comes to captaincy is finding the characters where it doesn't become a burden, for example, that actually brings out the best in them, that they can continue to focus on their roles. And I think sometimes you give captaincy to your best players, for example, in the hopes that it'll just work out, and it doesn't always. And I think that's why sometimes captaincy is such an interesting and a difficult decision to make. So I'm not going to rule it out. For example, maybe in the future, Evan Roos progresses into becoming a potential captain. Right now, I want Evan Roos to push to become a Springbok number 8. That's what I think he is probably focusing on. Don't sit here and look at, well, who's going to be the next captain. I think we did that with Salman Murat. I think we very quickly said this is going to be a Springbok captain, and he's had lots of injuries, and he struggled to even establish himself in the Springbok squad. Let these players establish themselves, and then we can look at leadership. Yes, sometimes you do have to pick a young side, and you give them captaincy and responsibilities and stuff like that. But I think that that's happened in the past with maybe much less forward planning. Looking at it now, looking at the side that we've got and the coaching staff, we are far more long term, and we are far more structured with regards to how we phase players in. And for that perspective, I don't think you necessarily need to look at a potential young captain just for the sake of looking for the next generation. I believe that those leaders will be brought in, they'll be sort of integrated into a sort of a leadership group, they'll be given responsibilities as they go, and then by the time they get made the Springbok captain, for example, they won't be their first time the rodeo. They'll have been pretty settled, and they'll know exactly what their role is. I think that's what makes this coaching staff so good, is that they will never throw somebody into the deep end too much. The structures are so strong that people always feel comfortable, or at the very least feel backed up, supported, feel that they are given the full belief and backing by the coaches and their players. But what do you know? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and let's see. We'll wait and see. I personally don't think he's particularly high up on the list. Again, I'd rather him just try and focus on actually becoming a Bok regular rather than just the potential Springbok captain. But maybe everybody else disagrees. What do you think?